On this week's episode of the Father Dynasty Podcast, I shout out Mrs. Father Dynasty, Week 8 tricks and treats, and Dynasty Trades ahead of Week 9. So, let's go! What is up, everybody? Welcome to yet another episode of the Father Dynasty Podcast. I'm your fatherly host, Chew, here in the manhole, here to talk fatherhood, fantasy football, and everything in between. And no guest this week. It is me. I have no Luigi to my Mario, but I am, of course, dressed as the video game plumber, Super Mario. And this is the time of year. It's Halloween. We're recording it on Monday, but this will be coming out on Halloween on the Tuesday. And excited to see what everybody decides on costumes, whether it be the parents actually getting to pick their costumes or their kids telling them what they're going to be, and then the parents just having to deal with it. Very excited that my son picked, I think, pretty easy ones for my wife and I. My wife had found a very good set of, it's like a fleece onesie of a skeleton. So we're both going to be pretty warm. Very excited to have that on what I think will be a cool Halloween night, as opposed to this weekend in Southwest Virginia, or I guess in where I was at in North Carolina, where it was 80 plus and scorching hot. But I'll get to that here in a second. So first, I would like to address the Dynasty Daddy of the Week. So Dynasty Daddy of the Week, this one's easy for me. It is my lovely, my beautiful wife, Mrs. Father Dynasty. Sounds weird to say that way. Wanted to give her a huge shout out. I know Dynasty Daddy, maybe ensues it's a daddy out there, but, you know, a shout out to all those parents that play all those roles. And to my wife, she held down the fort. This weekend, I went and witnessed the Panthers' first victory of the season. There is no longer a winless team in the NFL. And disappointed it took till week 8 to find that out, but was very excited to go to Charlotte. My wife had gotten myself and my best bud Tyler, long-time guest on the show, as you may remember him. He and his family live down near Charlotte, so got to go down there, visit he and his wife and their little girl, and got to, of course, see another loyal Dynasty Daddy in Jacob Ridgeway as well. So it's good to see all them. Got to go to Bank of America Stadium, had some sweet seats, again, thanks to my wife for the Father's Day gift. It was a good game at the end. It was pretty rough to see, not too exciting of one. It was 12-13 towards the tail end, and, offenses really on either side weren't really firing necessarily. I do honestly think, with the vantage point I had on a number of the plays and the key throws, C.J. Stroud, he made some pretty tremendous throws in some pretty tight windows, and I think he's certainly the real deal. If we didn't already think that, I definitely think that now. This was, of course, the first week with the Panthers handing over play calling duties to the OC, so didn't seem tremendously different or more inventive necessarily, and Bryce Young still definitely leaning tremendously on Adam Thielen. He made some pretty tremendous catches as well. But hopefully, this is the first one of the season for the Panthers. Hopefully they can continue to right the ship and everything. But again, massive shout out to my wife. Shout out to all the parents out there. Whether it be going out of town for something, maybe more fun, or going out of town for work or family stuff, that kind of thing. It always helps to, have a great support system, have a great spouse that's able to help, kind of hold down the fort, so to speak. And, I think everybody balances that as best they can. So shout out to my wife because she did it tremendously, and sincerely appreciate her for that. So shout out to Mrs. Father Dynasty. So I had a question I wanted to ask everybody. Of course, time of year, Halloween. What are you and your kids dressing up for as Halloween, and favorite candy? So, of course, as I mentioned, currently dressed as Super Mario. This is for my day job. We're going to be doing as Mario, Luigi, and then Peach. So we got a small office that we're going to do a little like team costume kind of thing. And then for nighttime, for taking out our little man, my wife and I are going to be in essentially like fleece skeleton onesies. So I'm hoping it's a little cool, so it'll be like perfect temperature. We're not going to be scorching hot like we were, like Tyler and I were in Bank of America Stadium, cooked by the sun for 3 to 4 hours. And my son is actually going to be those like fill-up costumes, the ones that have the fan in them that kind of like, fill up. It looks like he's riding a T-Rex. So he loves dinosaurs. He knows what a pteranodon is, what an ankylosaurus is. He's a real deal when it comes to dino expert for sure. So he was very excited to pick that one. And that was after multiple years of being Spider-Man. Like, without question, it was Spider-Man every time. So surprised that he changed it up there, but looking forward to seeing how much he enjoys that. And jumping over to Week 8 as we talk about the FF perspective. So with the FF perspective, talking about Week 8 tricks and treats, as of course it is Halloween time. And Week 8 had plenty of both. So first talking about the quarterbacks that were most certainly treats, and this is being filmed, recorded, whatever, during Monday Night Football, so that will exclude any of those players here. So Sam Howell finished as the QB1, 32 fantasy points. They almost took down the Philadelphia Eagles, lost by 7, but they ended up falling to the 3rd in the division, but pretty tremendous. Sam Howell is QB8 on the year, and that does include him. I think it was a 4-interception game against Buffalo with no touchdowns. So, I mean, by this point, he's had nearly 2 400-yard games. I think one was in the 387 range, and then he just had another one that was, within 10 yards, 400 yards. Airing the heck out of the ball. I really do like what this offense has looked like under Eric Bieniemy coming over from Kansas City. I think he's really spread the love, so to speak, when you look at what he's done. Certainly with the resurgence of Curtis Samuel. Previously, you would have wanted Jahan Dotson to be more involved, and he finally had quite a blow-up game this past week in Week 8. Shockingly enough, you have Jamison Crowder, a former favorite, a throwback to the team, who's rejoined the team during the season and doing well. I mean, he had quite a blow-up game as well. So between those guys, you got Terry McLaurin, you got Logan Thomas, and that, again, is even excluding the backfield. I think this passing attack has been pretty tremendous. And unfortunately, on the other side of the ball, the defense maybe has not exactly been what we had hoped it was going to be. Certainly in the secondary, as they've given up a number of big plays. And it's, as well as this offense has been in terms of putting up points and stuff, it's been tough to counter what that defense has given up. Another treat there is Dak Prescott. So a very up and down season, but finishing as a QB3 in Week 8, 29.1 points. Again, very up and down, both in his performances and also with the defense's performances throughout the season. On the year, quarterback 16, nothing too tremendously exciting. At this point in the season, he and C.J. Stroud are the same, play the same number of games, right at the same number of fantasy points. And, I think we all had expected with a lot of the coach speak with McCarthy talking about wanting to stick more with the run. We expected, maybe a bit of a step back from the tremendous air attack that Dallas has had for a number of years now. And I think we were at least hoping, there's been this boom game and I believe another one. And I think you at least hope that it'd be a little more consistent. Dak has been, pretty efficient with his passing game, but really want to see a lot more scoring, which that's, what we're used to is just a very high-powered Dallas offense. And, while they are, I believe, second in the division, of course, to Philly, if they're going to make it to the playoffs, you want to see that offense firing on a couple more cylinders to be able to actually stick it out. And a tremendous treat in Will Levis's first start, finishing as the QB6, 26.6 fantasy points. A treat indeed. 4 touchdowns and a little bit of trivia. And shout out to Jacob Ridgway for this little slice of trivia here. So there were 3 rookies ever to have 4 touchdowns in their first game. And I will go ahead. Will Levis is, of course, one of those 3. But I will go ahead and just kind of drop that in now. And once I finish the quarterbacks, I will go ahead and give you the answer in case you want to maybe pause it and think about it for a little bit. So shout out to, again, Jacob Ridgway for that tremendous trivia, and just another shout out to Tyler for getting both of the answers because I got neither of them. But Will Levis, I mean, you have to feel good about that in Tennessee. Again, I think most see it, of course, as a lost season with the trade deadline approaching tomorrow, or as of when this is posted today. People were hoping, do you move on from Derrick Henry? Do you move on from possibly DeAndre Hopkins? DeAndre Hopkins just has a blow-up game, his best game as a Tennessee Titan thus far. Derrick Henry, of course, has a solid game as well. At this point, I don't think you really see it as the season's going to turn around in a positive way. They're going to make the playoffs and make a run. But you're excited to see what Will Levis did in his first game, and against, not an easy defense in the Atlanta Falcons. So love to see Will Levis pushing the ball down the field, looking pretty poised, and looking tremendously better than Malik Willis for sure. So jumping over to the final treat at the quarterback position, Josh Dobbs finishing as the QB7, 24.9 fantasy points. A treat, yes, but also a trick, because almost immediately after the game, getting the nod for Week 9, then Gannon goes ahead and recants and says, actually, after watching the tape, it looks like it's going to be Clayton Tune starting in Week 9 if Kyler's not ready. And they also has squashed some of the rumors that Kyler's going to be traded. They're saying he's not going to be traded before the deadline. Disappointing, though, with Josh Dobbs. I know from a NFL standpoint, I think there's maybe been some inefficiencies and certainly some turnovers. I think he's had 2 interceptions in each of the last 2 games, if I remember correctly. But I know that's been a bit of a problem. But again, if you look at with what he's been dealing with now, Zach Ertz is on the injured reserve. You've had James Conner on the injured reserve for a couple of weeks at this point. So they're already lacking a lot of talent and weapons. So I think Josh Dobbs has done it by any means necessary. He's peppered in a bit of rushing as well. So it's been good from a fantasy standpoint if you think about the cost of what Josh Dobbs was as he was getting traded to the Arizona Cardinals, last second when it comes to getting a chance to really get acquainted with the offense. So disappointed to see that, but maybe that does mean Kyler's truly close to coming back. I don't know. So jumping over to the tricks at quarterback, and those tricks are Patrick Mahomes and all the injuries at quarterback. So Patrick Mahomes having his lowest fantasy performance of the season thus far, QB 29, 7.6 fantasy points, only narrowly above Tommy DeVito, who came in relief and had -1 passing yards and a rushing touchdown, if I remember correctly. Anyway, don't worry about it for Dynasty. Patrick Mahomes, of course, did not have a good game. They lost to Denver 24-9. Unbelievable with how Denver has been playing this season. But Patrick Mahomes, still quarterback 3 on the year, averaging 20.5 fantasy points. He'll be okay. And like I mentioned, injuries at quarterback. So absolute tricks here as when it comes to Kirk Cousins tearing his Achilles, Jaren Hall stepping in, the BYU product. Performed okay. There have been rumblings that actually, with the trade deadline coming up, and of course, as of the day of this being published, that is the trade deadline that day. Jameis Winston possibly getting shipped over there from New Orleans. That would be tremendous. I think everyone's been waiting to see whether it be Jameis or whether it be Jacoby Brissett sent somewhere to at least start a little bit. And Jameis Winston stepping into this type of offense, I think, is with those weapons, again, even with Justin Jefferson still out, I think helps continue that Minnesota Vikings run, and I don't think, ruins any future plans when it comes to Kirk Cousins' deal being up, and then if Jameis is traded, Jameis only being on a 1-year deal as well. Another one is Tyrod Taylor, of course, former Hokie. Hate to see somebody going down again. As I mentioned before, Tommy DeVito stepping in the last bit of the game. Daniel Jones, however, expected to come back in Week 9. Interesting that it's after Tyrod goes down and after Tommy DeVito steps in, they're like, oh, no, Daniel Jones is healthy now. So apparently he's fine. Another one here, Matt Stafford got a thumb injury, and this is something I think he's dealt with before. Brett Ripien stepped in, and There have been rumblings. Again, currently Matt Stafford is day-to-day, but could be placed on the IR. So I'd hate to see that, but they did talk about Sean McVay saying that they were going to be needing to add to the quarterback room immediately. So curious to see if they're going to look with players they've had before on the roster, familiar with the system, which would make sense, or maybe some of the flashy, quote-unquote, free agents if it's a Carson Wentz or that sort of thing. So we'll see where that goes. And finally, another injury, Kenny Pickett left with a rib injury. Mitch Trubisky, of course, filled in, and no current news on what that means for Kenny Pickett in the upcoming game, whether he's going to play through that injury or not. So jumping over to the running backs. The trick is nearly every running back's performance. Really a pretty tremendous disappointment when it comes to what the running backs did in fantasy. The treat is CMC finishes the RB1 again. It's interesting that that's kind of commonplace at this point, so it's like that's not really a treat. That's just what is supposed to happen. We did have Gus Edwards blowing up, finishing as a RB2 with damn near 30 fantasy points, pretty tremendous. Alvin Kamara continuing to get tremendous volume, finishing as the RB3. That Bears backfield, though, what a bummer. You have Darrington Evans as being the one that is leading the trio of Deonta Foreman, Roshan Johnson, and Darrington Evans. Him finishing as the RB15 with 13 points. Talking about some of these guys, the RBs that finished outside the top 32. Isaiah Pacheco, Tony Pollard, Jerome Ford, who came quickly back from his injury. As I mentioned, Deonta Foreman, Damian Pierce, and Alexander Madison, who was outplayed by Cam Akers, mostly with the touchdown that he scored. But jumping over to the wide receivers, so the trick is you have some interesting names in the top 24. And I don't mean that in a bad way, a trick in terms of, maybe didn't see that coming. So the trick there is we've got, of course, CeeDee Lamb finishing as the wide receiver 1, 41 fantasy points. Again, I talked about before, Dallas offense has not looked like what we expected it to be. Certainly not as high-powered as a passing offense, but glad to see CeeDee getting his due there. DeAndre Hopkins, of course, on the arm of Will Levis, just blowing up. Many of those deep touchdowns were actually to DeAndre Hopkins, and maybe he's no longer regretting actually joining the Tennessee Titans, as it has been tough sledding thus far. Two surprising ones, as I had mentioned earlier when I was talking about Sam Howell. Jahan Dotson finishing as wide receiver 7, and Jamison Crowder finishing as wide receiver 11. So bizarre. And then another 3 that were pretty shocking, all finishing inside the top 24. You got Rashid Shaheed as a wide receiver 8, Gabe Davis as a wide receiver 9, Khalil Shakir finishing as a wide receiver 23. And this is all the 2 Buffalo Bills finishing that well. Stephon Diggs as a wide receiver 20, despite getting 12 targets. And Chris Olave finishing as a wide receiver 48, despite 9 targets. So definitely a wonky week. Disappointing on the running back front, wonky when it comes to wide receivers. Here's a couple of names that we all know that finished outside the top 32. You have JSN, you got T. Higgins, DK Metcalf, Chris Olave, DJ Moore, George Pickens, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, and Nico Collins. So an interesting week indeed, but another interesting one when it comes to disappointments at tight end is the trick when it comes to Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce, both finishing outside the top 5. Both. A weird week indeed. You have Mark Andrews finishing as a tight end 12 and Travis Kelce finishing as the tight end 13. But the treat is that you finally have a Trey McBride breakout on the heels of Zach Ertz being put on the IR. You have Trey McBride finishing as the tight end 1 with 25.5 fantasy points. Love to see it. I didn't think it was going to happen. He was someone who I'd mentioned to sell in Dynasty earlier in the year. Of course, that was when you had a healthy Zach Ertz, but the point remains. Glad to see that he's doing well, and we'll see what happens with the shakeup at quarterback, if that same kind of connection continues or if it's going to be a different receiver. So next, I want to talk about some Dynasty trades ahead of Week 9. some that I plucked from the Dynasty Daddy trade database, a tremendous tool to use. And disclaimer, I love the tool. It's great to have a free tool that's incredible as that. You can bring in your teams, look at trade finders, that sort of thing. I will clarify, in no way affiliated with them or as a sponsor or anything like that, but strongly recommend it. Very cool. And certainly don't mean to make it sound like I'm stealing the Dynasty Daddy of the Week. It's something I've always called people on the podcast since I started it a couple years ago. So shout out to this tool, dynastydaddy.com. Go check it out. Go use it. Very cool to use when tracking all your teams. But what I did here was you can pick different things like, your team's format and everything. So, because, if you're looking at a 8-team start 8 PPR Superflex 2.10 in premium league versus a much deeper no tight end premium, no PPR type league, that trade's going to look a lot different. So with this one, the parameters I was looking at was Dynasty, of course. They do redraft if you have any trades in there. 2 quarterback. It can either be half point or full point PPR. Tight end premium of no premium, quarter point, and half point premium. I think all of that is kind of in the same range of how you see trades. 10 or 12 team, 8 to 10 starters. And all of these deals were made as of today being when I recorded them, so on Monday. Aside from there was 2 on the tight end one, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So that's the parameters. There's 3 deals for each player, 1 quarterback, 1 running back, 1 wide receiver, and 1 tight end. Interesting players, whether it be recent production or injury or something about volatility that had me pique my interest to kind of look in and see what their value is and give my thoughts on some of these trades. So the first one, we've got a Kirk Cousins trade, 12 teams, start 10 PPR, half point tight end premium. Kirk Cousins in a 2024 first for Bryce Young. Now, for me, again, I'm a Panthers fan. I literally just watched Bryce Young yesterday, and of course, have tracked him throughout the season. If I'm seeing this, and again, it's really regardless of where the 2024 first is, because I don't have any indication of where it is. I'd rather take the Cousins in the first side. I know Bryce Young is the younger quarterback. He's the first-round quarterback, of course. You have Kirk Cousins, who is 35 now, will be coming off an Achilles tendon injury. Maybe by the beginning of next season, if not at some point in the middle of next season. He, of course, is going to be off his contract with the Vikings. Will he be re-upped with the Vikings? I don't think so, certainly now. And where does he play after this? I don't know. I do think he's going to find a spot. I don't think he's done yet. Well, it doesn't mean anything quite yet. I think if you look at the 39-year-old Aaron Rodgers, who is already out there on the field throwing a little bit, again, not moving around or anything like that, but, out there standing there throwing, I have to believe, Kirk Cousins, again, he's nothing if not consistent. And I really want to see him back out there, get another 2-3 years out of it. And so with that, and with kind of recycling that first, because I'm not a huge believer in Bryce Young. I'm hoping he turns it around for the sake of maybe leading the Panthers a bit better. But I'm thinking in terms of from a fantasy perspective, I'd rather have Cousins in that first, and I think that might be a little more flexible than having Bryce Young. Jumping over to the second deal, we've got a 12-team start 10 PPR half point tight end premium. Kirk Cousins and either just a 2024 second or a 2025 second. There's a mishmash of a lot of deals that were Cousins for just a single pick. Honestly, if I'm looking at that, it's tough, but since it's super flex, I would almost lean towards taking that pick. And I know what I was saying with the last one with, Cousins in the first over Bryce Young, but when I look at this, this is a 12-team. I'm not too certain, when it comes to what is his marketability when he comes back. So with the last one, I'm getting that first, and it's Bryce Young, and then Cousins is almost the sweetener to say if he comes back and does anything, certainly at a startable level, then that's gravy. With this one, it's all the risk of when he comes back, what team is he on? How is he producing? What is that looking like? Because regardless of what team he comes back to, assuming it's not the Vikings, we knew his role in the Vikings. They gave him tremendous volume. He had Justin Jefferson. He had most recently Jordan Addison, KJ Osborne, TJ Hawkinson. Who's to say he's going to get anywhere close to that anywhere else, including actually the passing volume? So I do believe in him as hopefully being a startable, good superflex quarterback, but I think you're going to want that flexibility of having that second, specifically, hopefully be a 2024 instead of 2025. But yeah, I definitely lean towards the picks there. And last one for Kirk Cousins, 12-team. This would be a start 10, half-point PPR, no tight end premium. This is a pretty interesting one for me. Kirk Cousins and Breece Hall for Justin Herbert. For me, this is a no-brainer. It's Justin Herbert. It's super flex, so I get you're trading a quarterback and you have another quarterback on the other side. Breece Hall has been getting definitely better, far and away, outpacing having Dalvin Cook on the squad. This is Breece Hall's backfield. But it's hard for me not to pick the young top 5 dynasty quarterback in Justin Herbert. The offense is now clicking the way we wanted it to. Even when you're talking about Mike Williams being out, then you have Joshua Palmer stepping up. As of week 8, Quentin Johnston had a nice day. I know it only came once everyone else essentially got injured. But again, he stepped up. He had an okay day. You got Gerald Everett. You obviously have Austin Eckler. So I really like what that Chargers team is doing. And I think Justin Herbert is a tremendous dynasty investment. And especially, at this point in the season, and certainly if you think about if you're going into next season, would you want to carry Breece Hall throughout the offseason with uncertainty in that Jets offense, or do you rather have Justin Herbert? I'd rather have Justin Herbert. Jumping over to the running back I wanted to talk about, Travis Etienne having a stellar year. So the first deal I've got, it's a 10-team start 10 PPR no tight end premium. Travis Etienne in a 2024 third for Jonathan Taylor. Now for me, this is a smash on the Etienne side. Because if I'm looking at Travis Etienne and Jonathan Taylor straight up, I'm taking Travis Etienne. Now, the sweetener is, of course, the third, and it is just a third. It's essentially a lottery ticket when you think of hit rates on thirds, but it is a third in a 10-team, which is solid, and you're starting 10, so it never hurts to have another third. Who knows? That could be the third that you pair with another player to move up to the second in 2024. That's usually how I view those thirds, but Jonathan Taylor's had a pretty disappointing year. He's still splitting work with Zach Moss, and over the last 2 weeks, it's really been Moss has been more effective, certainly from a fantasy standpoint. Of course, Anthony Richardson's hurt. This isn't the team that going into the season I think we expected, but really hoping that Taylor can turn it around. But I'd rather take the one that's currently performing better and getting a third out of it. Jumping over to the second deal, 10-team start 9 PPR tight end premium. No tight end premium, excuse me. Travis Etienne, 2024 third. T. Higgins in a 2024 first. So that's Etienne in a third for T. Higgins in a 2024 first. This one was more interesting to me, given how T. Higgins hasn't exactly been going bonkers this season, but it's Higgins in the first. I think about a more stable asset in T. Higgins, given he is a wide receiver. And I assume by this time next year, he's going to be on a different team. I don't know that the Bengals are going to keep him. I know they'd want to, obviously. But again, even if he stayed on the Bengals, being tied to Joe Burrow is not a bad thing, even though their offense has been a bit wonky this year thus far. And I do hope he actually ends up going to another team where he can be that number one target. Certainly from a fantasy perspective, that's what the hope is. But then you hope it's a decent enough quarterback that can feed him the ball well enough. But that on top of getting a 2024 first, as we know, Etienne started his career getting an immediate injury. So I'd rather carry a strong wide receiver and first into the offseason than I would a running back and a third. And the final one I've got here, this one was tough. So 12-team start 10 PPR half-point tight end premium. Travis Etienne for Marquise Hollywood Brown and a 2024 first. So this again, at this point, if you're competing, I can very clearly see why you would send away Marquise Brown in that first to get Etienne. if that was that last kind of bit to push you over the top, again, I would imagine if you're sending away Marquise Brown in this deal, he's a depth guy that you probably haven't even started at this point in the year. Maybe you have once because of injury or something. And I can certainly understand why you do that. If you're rebuilding, I can understand why you obviously want to get the Marquise Brown in 2024 for his side. It's tough because Etienne is performing so well, and it is so clearly his backfield, despite all the nonsense that was spouted at the beginning of the year, or before the season started, talking about Tank Bigsby going to steal his job, or steal 50% of the work. Not even close. And jumping over to the wide receiver, ironically, a Jacksonville Jaguar as well. Calvin Ridley, looking at deal number 1, 12 teams start 8 PPR, no tight end premium. Calvin Ridley for the tight end 1 in week 8, Trey McBride, and a 2025 first. So again, no tight end premium. But if I'm able to get a first for Ridley at this point, I'm taking it. And if I also get Trey McBride, who, if he's coming on strong and is actually going to turn into a top 10, top 12 tight end for fantasy, that's tremendous. And I know at least from the standpoint of competitively, if you don't have, those top 3 tight ends, that the 4 to 12 or 4 to 15 or whatever is kind of negligible in terms of scoring. But at that point, if I'm looking at Trey McBride as the throw in to the deal and getting a first for Ridley, I'm taking it. After Ridley's first game, he's looked a lot like, at least his fantasy performance has looked a lot like what I was thinking it was going to be in terms of not to what he was before. And again, could that be his usage? Christian Kirk, I know, has been able to operate in a more friendly position that he's used to and has done very well, largely. Second deal, 12 teams start 10 PPR quarter point tight end premium. This one was interesting, and I would love to see the team construction on each of these. Jamar Chase for Calvin Ridley, Alvin Kamara, and Derek Carr. I know it's super flex, and I still don't get it because Derek Carr is almost looking like he's going to be off that team in 2 years, despite the deal. Calvin Ridley, of course, not performing tremendously well. So you're giving up 3 older assets. Alvin Kamara, I can understand if you need him now for what his performance is, his insane volume, but still, you get Jamar Chase for that, smash accept. Jamar Chase, every time there. And this last one, this one is really the signifier of how far he's fallen, depending on which side you're on with this one. Deal number 3, 12 teams start 9, half-point PPR, half-point tight end premium. Calvin Ridley for Rashad Bateman and a 2025 second. Sadly, I'm leaning towards the Bateman second side, mostly because of the second. Not too bullish on Bateman at this point in his career, but that's as far as we've fallen. I mean, as Ridley continues, again, this is through week 8, just performing well below what we thought he'd be doing. And I'd rather cut bait sooner rather than later. That's not to say he's not going to have another boom game here and there, but I don't think he's who we thought he was going to be coming back. And that's not a knock on him. Again, it could be his usage and that kind of thing, because it doesn't look like he's not fresh and not ready to go necessarily, but it just hasn't been what we thought it would be. And lastly, Dalton Kincaid. And this first deal is from today. The other 2 are from yesterday, so this will be on Sunday. So deal number 1, 12 teams start 10 PPR half-point tight end premium. Dalton Kincaid for T. Higgins. Straight up. Now with this one, I'm still leaning T. Higgins. Again, half-point tight end premium, not big enough for me to want to go ahead and hold on to Kincaid. Ideally, there'd be a pick on the Higgins side if I could, but again, this seems like just a perception and value type deal with there being nothing else added to it, and most of the time I'm going to take Higgins. Like this is not Kincaid. You have to view him at this point as one of those top 3 tight ends, and I don't quite think that yet. Talking about deal number 2, 10 teams start 10 PPR no tight end premium. This one's pretty wild. Lamar Jackson and Cooper Kupp for Saquon Barkley, Dalton Kincaid, 2024 first and 2024 second. Now, this would largely change depending on if I knew that where these first and seconds were. But if I'm thinking mid, I've got to go with the Lamar Jackson Cooper Kupp side. And again, this is no tight end premium, so that, of course, diminishes Kincaid's value a bit. If you're looking at 10-team, and it is, of course, T quarterback, as all of these are, Lamar Jackson's a stud. He's tremendously efficient this season. Cooper Kupp, I know in the last, 2 weeks, week 7, week 8, hasn't looked as good as we thought he would. Also, now that you have Matt Stafford out, he's day-to-day as we speak, but who knows? They've talked about him possibly being put in the IR. But to be able to get Lamar Jackson in that deal, if you were to take out Cooper Kupp and then just look at it as the Lamar Jackson for the rest, just something to consider. So I'm definitely going Lamar Jackson, Cooper Kupp side on that one. And the last one I'm looking at, 12-team, start 10 half-point PPR, no tight end premium. Got Luke Musgrave and a 2026 second. So already getting into 2026 for these picks for Dalton Kincaid. Now, as I mentioned before, with the usage of Kincaid, I like what they're doing now. Of course, it's only happening now once Dawson Knox is out and he had to have surgery. Should be back, I think, relatively soon from what we're hearing. But the thing that makes me cautious about Kincaid, of again viewing him as in the Travis Kelce tier, is one, no one's Travis Kelce, obviously, but the increased usage of Khalil Shakir made me a bit nervous because I was thinking, well, then they don't think that Dalton Kincaid is the one-size-fits-all to just take that role over. That's not saying he can't do it. It's not saying, it's just, it seems like it's how they would prefer to use him. And again, his production is up in week 7 and week 8 in terms of his targets and everything like that. But while I'm not tremendously inspired by the Green Bay Packers offense necessarily, if I'm able to get Musgrave, and I'd prefer if he could bump it into a 2025 second and not have to wait till 2026. That wraps it up for the trades leading into week 9. And again, huge shout out to dynastydaddy.com. Tremendous tool. Again, I'm not affiliated with it, not a sponsor or anything like that. Just I thoroughly enjoy the tool, and love what they can do helping with the trade finder, especially as you can kind of look at different leagues, different league settings, and that sort of thing. And it's not just a generic if you're in an 8-team, start 8, 2 quarterback, that kind of thing. It really works for pretty much anybody, and definitely recommend go checking it out. So that wraps it up for this week's episode of the Father Dynasty Podcast. And, again, huge shout out to the Mrs. Father Dynasty, as she is the Dynasty Daddy of the week, holding down the fort while I went and watched my Carolina Panthers get their first win of the season with my great buddy Tyler Daly. But again, it's wraps up the episode, and everybody out there for Halloween, let's go.